Good morning. Thoughts from the car today. Today, I want to talk about challenging overthinking. I am an overthinker, a chronic overthinker. I've gotten a lot better with it, but I can still very easily fall into overthinking. And last night, I was meeting with a small group that I meet with every Monday evening, a bold living small group. And the women, we were talking about overthinking and how it's so easy to do that. And so I want to talk today about how to challenge that overthinking, how to stop it in its tracks. And I think first we have to talk about like what is and why does overthinking happen. So overthinking is when we just think and think and think and we can't stop ourselves from thinking about a particular thing. It's a little bit different from rumination. Rumination is where it's the same thing over and over and over, like the same event in the same way. Whereas overthinking is like thinking about something, a situation, and thinking about it from all these different angles and how to fix it. And just different perspectives and different angles. So it's not quite rumination. Once you get to rumination, that can be super detrimental in a lot of different ways. So we're talking about overthinking and not rumination. There's a little bit of a nuance there. So why does overthinking happen? So some of the factors that contribute to overthinking is the fear of the unknown. And these are like the psychological ways. So the fear of the unknown and not thinking about like the potential negative consequences of a situation that is going on. And then perfectionism, which we know is just constantly trying to do everything perfectly. And it's a constant evaluation and constant self-criticism of ourselves is oftentimes what goes along with the overthinking. We're talking about perfectionism. And then the past experiences that we have can contribute to our overthinking. So it can definitely influence how we think about a situation or we think about ourselves. Stress and anxiety in general can contribute to why we might be overthinking about a situation in our life. And then a lack of confidence. So if we are doubting our abilities or if someone has been super critical with us, that might contribute to a lack of confidence and our doubt in our own abilities. So those are like the psychological factors that are most common of why we tend to overthink. But then there are also cognitive reasons why we start to overthink a lot of times. And the first one is catastrophic thinking. And so that's kind of what I do is that I am always thinking about and exaggerating the worst possible scenario on things. And then this takes me, rather than, something bad, something minor, it goes into a major issue. And then I go to the major issue every time as to that's what is going to happen in the situation. And then I want to like over prepare and overthink, and it's not helpful necessarily. Also cognitive thinking in the all or nothing category. So everything is very black and white. There's not shades of gray. And this causes us to overthink because so many times situations don't fit in the black and white category. And so it confuses the brain when we cognitively are an all or nothing kind of thinker. Then there is mind reading. So we oftentimes might assume that there are negative thoughts from other people, and that might influence how we look at a situation and then influences why we're overthinking about the situation. And the last most common cognitive issue that causes overthinking would be personalization. So we end up blaming ourselves for things that we can't even control, like things that are not controllable in our life and in situations. We personalize the issue to being our fault and we blame ourselves. And then there are a few biological reasons why overthinking might be happening. Definitely a neurochemical imbalance. So dopamine and serotonin, there's an imbalance somewhere in there. And oftentimes this will contribute to depression. And the way that we can help fix neurochemical imbalances is by medication. Also, vitamin D honestly can help so many things, and vitamin B as well can really help us to be able to kind of get those neurochemical balances a little bit better. Folate too also is something that can help contribute to a more balanced neurochemical balance in our brain. And then there's genetics. So oftentimes people just genetically have more of a predisposition to overthinking. And then so I think those are the two most common biological reasons. And then I think it's important for us to understand that there are triggers for some of these things. So there are internal triggers and external triggers. So some of the common internal triggers are stress, boredom, fatigue, loneliness, and uncertainty would probably be our most common things. Those are internal things. They're the thought processes that we have. And then there are external factors that can also kind of trigger us to why like the psychological, cognitive, or biological reasons why we overthink happen. And so some of those external things are like a negative news in the world or a negative event that is happening in our life, some kind of conflict, like a conflict in a relationship. There is social pressure that we can have, perfectionism. And I think another big one is social media. So there's that comparativeness in our life, that external factor that happens a lot of times during our time on social media. And I think something that needs to be said, I mean, obviously when we're talking about overthinking, I'm talking about it from the vein of it being a very detrimental thing. Here's the thing though, is yes, there can be some positives out of overthinking. It can be helpful to us. So ways that it can be helpful to us is it can help us analyze and compare issues. So if this helps us to have like different perspectives, and ultimately I feel like it can help us have more informed decisions. So this is where like I tend to go is I start out by just analyzing and comparing things and trying to make sure I'm getting the best answer of things. But what can happen with each of these things that are like good things about overthinking is that we can take it too far. It can go, we can get too deep in it, and it can become an issue where it becomes detrimental. But it starts out good because we're analyzing and comparing, right? And then that ultimately is helping us make a better, more informed decision on things. Another reason why it can be helpful to overthink a little bit is it can help us plan for our future. So I'm a very future thinker. And so I'm constantly thinking about, well, how is this going to affect the future? And, you know, how do I make the future better? Like, how do I do better, do more, problem solve, right? So when we're planning for our future, this can help us anticipate the challenges when we overthink and prepare for all those worst case scenarios. So it can actually be a good thing. Hi, all you preppers out there. When you're overthinking, this is, you know, you're planning for your future. I get it. So it can be helpful in those in certain situations. It also can be helpful to overthink a little bit, help us in developing our creativity. So when we are exploring all these different possibilities and we are exploring like all the different scenarios and we're problem solving and we're thinking about the future, and we're looking at different perspectives, which means we're more open to a lot of different things, this can actually help us generate a lot of creativity and innovation. And so a lot of times you'll hear whenever there's been like a huge recession in the world, and that's when there's like a ton of entrepreneurs that come on the scene. The reason for this is because they're problem solvers and they find a solution innovatively to a problem that's out there. And usually the problem is that they don't have any money and they need to figure out how they're going to make a living. And so this is where like that creativity comes in. When we tend to overthink, we're just more open because we're open to all possibilities, because we're thinking about all the possibilities. And this just helps us to be more innovative sometimes. So overthinking can be good for creativity. And I think lastly, overthinking can be a really good thing because it helps us develop and gain a deeper understanding of ourselves, which means that we're having a lot more awareness of ourselves because we're getting to know ourselves internally. And this helps us just be more aware in general. So there are some potential good things that can come out of overthinking. But overall, overthinking is really detrimental to us. And the reasons and how it can be super detrimental to us are starting with analysis paralysis. This is where we kind of get frozen and we don't take any action. Like we just perpetually are in this state of research or thinking about things, afraid to make a move. And ultimately what happens is when we get an analysis paralysis is we're not taking action. And oftentimes this means we could have a lot of potential missed opportunities, whether it's a job or a relationship or something for our business, because we're not willing to risk or we're too afraid of something because of fear or whatever. We're just in research mode. We can miss a lot of opportunities that we maybe not could have taken advantage of before. It's detrimental. Overthinking is very detrimental because of the amount of stress and anxiety that it can produce. When we are overthinking, oftentimes it can put us into the rumination, and that can have a lot of detrimental effects on our health. That's another thing, is there can be a lot of health issues because we can get into chronic stress. We can develop that where we just are chronically stressed out and can't like come over that hump to actually do things that we know we need to do. And it gets us into where we are procrastinating a lot of things. When we get into this mode of overthinking and procrastination and all that kind of things, we will have a reduction in our productivity. So this, whether it's for our business or for work or in our family, whatever it is, we are just going to have a reduced capacity because we're using all of our capacity for all of our overthinking, and we just can't actually do the thing. We can't actually take the action because we're ruminating or we're, overthinking about something, which, goes into rumination. I think also when a detrimental thing is it can affect our relationships because we're chronically stressed. We're having the health issues. We have a lot of stress and anxiety. We're not making decisions that we need to do. So we're not being consistent and we're not moving forward and taking action in things. This can be very detrimental to our relationships because we need to do the things. We need to move forward. We need to be participating in our lives and in our relationships. And so when we're in that analysis paralysis or whatever, maybe super stressed or we're not having good health, we can't relate to people. We can't be social and we're stuck in our heads. And I think the last thing that is super detrimental with the overthinking is that we end up having a lot of self-doubt. And this means that we have a lack of confidence, which will contribute to, our productivity and how we relate to the world and affects our relationships. And we just have a lack of belief in ourselves and we don't trust ourselves when we're overthinking. And sometimes we just need to decide I'm going to take action because I trust myself. I can trust myself and I can have confidence in myself and decisions that I make. And this involves like leaning into and learning to trust our intuition as well. So I've told you about all the problems and all about it. So what do we do about it when we find ourselves in these places of overthinking? How do we stop? So there are some techniques, and I will talk about the techniques, but in an overall sense, I think there are a few things that we can kind of do on a long-term basis that can help us eventually end overthinking or increase the way that we can be aware of that we're overthinking. And the first one is mindfulness and meditation. So having mindfulness and meditation puts us back in the present moment rather than thinking about the future and all the potential issues and the negativity and all the worries and the stress and trying to be perfect and lacking the confidence and all of those things. So when we give our full attention to our present moment with presence practices and doing mindfulness, using mindfulness techniques and meditation, we are here right now in this moment rather than thinking about all the catastrophes that could possibly happen. And long term, when we do these practices, we get better at them and they become more comfortable, and they overall will help us reduce our overthinking. Another thing, and I've talked about this a lot recently, is challenging our negative thoughts. We challenge our negative thoughts by identifying the negative thought. We challenge it, question it, ask where the evidence is of the truth of the negative thought. And then when we find that it is a negative thought, we're able to identify it and challenge it and realize it's not true. We then replace that negative thought with a positive affirmation and repeat that positive affirmation. So challenging those negative thoughts is absolutely paramount, because that's what gets us into the rumination, and it gets us into the analysis paralysis, because we're overthinking and planning for worst case scenarios. And then physical activity, like a short burst of physical activity. So like doing jumping jacks or something like that, just like you realize, oh my gosh, I'm overthinking this. You just stop what you're doing and you just get some physical activity in, like that short burst of physical activity. And also I think something that can kind of go along with that is also having hobbies and interests. So if you have a hobby that you enjoy, you can go do that hobby so that you can kind of like stop the thinking and stop the ruminating, getting into rumination. So that can be super helpful for us as well. And when we develop that hobby, it gives us something else to think about, because then we'll be thinking about our hobby rather than the situation or a negative situation that has us overthinking. A big thing is limiting our screen time. And I know we say this about everything, but it really is true. Like, so often when we get on screens, we start comparing our lives to others. And we have to remember that specifically in social media, people most of the time are going to show you the highlight reels of their life. They're not showing you all the hard things going on in their life. They don't want to necessarily be that vulnerable and share those things. And there's this like veil over what's really going on in their lives. And so we're comparing our real life, our authentic, vulnerable life, to their highlight reel. And so that is just not helpful. That is not going to help us. So limiting that screen time and that social media time really can help us in the long run. Have a boundary with it. Just have I'm not saying get off of it, because it can be a very helpful thing. I love social media. Some of my strongest, deepest relationships right now are through and because of social media. But we need to limit it and have boundaries. Just like with everything, we need to give boundaries to ourselves and give healthy balances. Social support. This means sometimes we have to go talk to someone, whether it's a counselor, a coach, to help us get over these humps and meet those goals and stop ruminating and overthinking about things, and like actually taking the action. Especially with coaching. That's why I love coaching, is because it actually helps us move forward and take the action that we need to take. So, that, sometimes we have to get that social support. We need that support in our lives, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're not meant to do this life alone. So we need each other and we need that support. And then I always mention self-care, because we have to take care of ourselves. And in the long run, when we're taking care of ourselves, that means that we're getting the serotonin. We're going to have a better neurobiological balance in our life. And so we're getting the serotonin, we're taking care of ourselves, we're taking the vitamins, we're out in the sunshine, we're having a good diet, and we're exercising, et cetera, et cetera. So we're taking care of ourselves. And that in the long run is really going to help us from overthinking, because when our body is healthy, then our mind is healthy. And when our mind is healthy, our body is healthy. It's a two-way street. And then when we find ourselves in a moment of overthinking and we can recognize it, we can interrupt the train of thought. And so I'm going to give you guys some techniques for when you're right in that moment of how to do it. The first one are grounding techniques. So one that's super helpful, and this one helps me a lot to ground myself, is the 5 4 3 2 1 technique. So you find 5 things you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you hear, 2 things that you smell, and 1 thing that you taste. And so that just helps you ground and get you back into that present moment. It's a mindfulness technique, and it's one of those ways that you can ground yourself back into your body rather than being up in the air and in your mind and, in the worst case scenario. Another thing is the deep box breathing. We've talked about this, taking the breath creating a box with your breathing, 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out, 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out, and we hold our breath at each of the corners. And then mindful observing. This is where we just start to notice the details of everything around us. And again, it's this taste, the smell, and just really noticing the things that we maybe wouldn't notice when we're in a space that we've been in that we're very familiar with. So finding those details that we maybe miss all the time and focusing on them. It's really just a distraction and refocusing. And then some cognitive techniques would be distraction. So we distract ourselves by whatever means necessary. Maybe it's putting on music or having a conversation with someone, doing something that distracts us. Having positive affirmations. I've talked about how I have like posted notes around where I live to kind of with positive affirmations to remind myself, because oftentimes we're in like perfectionism and it's just not helpful. And then stopping the thought and just literally when we notice that we're in a place of overthinking, just literally saying stop. out loud, saying stop, and that's it. And that will kind of redirect us. And I talked about having a burst of physical activity, so like doing jumping jacks or something like that. So challenge for you today. Your challenge today is, if you are an overthinker, is to use one of these techniques that I just told you about, whether it's the grounding technique or a cognitive technique or the physical technique, and use it and tell me how it goes. Let me know if it helps you. All right, guys, I think that's it. Have a happy Tuesday.